If you downloaded episode 8 of Discography Discussion, then you are ready for the greatest metal band of all time. That's right, April Fools. We didn't do an episode on Friday. Dan decided to go all the way to Indianapolis, and he decided to call us and tell us all about it because, you know, that's what he should have done.
Yeah, I mean, it gets a little boring up here, so as I am away on business currently.
Yeah, when life gives you lemons, you can make lemonade, or you can make life take the lemons back, as Cave Johnson once said. I definitely subscribe to that philosophy.
Oh, my. It's good to be back, Joe.
Back? I'm here. So, where are you? Oh, yeah, that's right, Indianapolis.
Indianapolis. I'm here on business. I will be returning triumphantly on Friday, real late, so I will not be planning any trips in the future. But anyway, just wanted to kind of get together and chat for a little while. We didn't want to go missing in action. We kind of wanted to let everybody know where we were at and what we were doing.
Yeah, this is one of those Dan and Joe show, call in audible and figure out what we can do with what we've got when we've got cell phones. Yep. So let's call it in and just give it a quick update. You know, one thing I'm going to say at the very beginning is thank you to everyone who is downloading this podcast. You guys, you are growing in numbers, and you know, we don't want you to talk to us less. We want you to talk to us more. We are on Twitter at Discuss Metal. We are on YouTube. We are on Tumblr. You can download this podcast on Google Play, on iTunes, on Stitcher. We're on TuneIn Radio. So if you have an Amazon Echo product, you can tell Alexa to play the latest episode of Discography Discussion, and she will play it.
She'll do it. It's crazy.
You can send us an email at danandjoeshow@gmail.com. We want to hear from you guys because, you know, this is going to be a one-off. We don't plan on making this a habit, but we do kind of have to take a detour this week and just talk about what's going on a little less because, well, like I said about the lemonade.
Yeah, so this month is a little crazy as I had to leave on a business trip this week, and we had originally planned to do a few extra little things. We had to push some of it back, but we will still be very active in the month of April. As soon as I get back, we're going to be actually having our very first band on our podcast. The band's called American Standard, and they play some awesome hardcore, metalcore, whatever you want to call it. And I really enjoyed what I heard, and they contacted us on Twitter, just like you should do. And,
at Discuss Metal.
At Discuss Metal, yeah, and it was great. We been talking to those guys and wanting to get them together for an episode. So we're going to do that as soon as we can when I get back. And then later on, we're actually going to do a actual discography discussion where we'll be talking about the band Death. And we've got a special guest lined up for that one. So hopefully that works out. Even if it doesn't, we will continue with the episode as planned. So it'll be really good to be hearing about Death.
I like Death. Didn't they invent death metal?
Why don't we talk about that later?
We can save that for later. Do you want to tell everybody who we're going to be talking about Death with when we decide to talk about Death?
I'm going to keep that a surprise as well.
Oh, there we go.
I can tell you if you want a hint, you can go back and listen to earlier episodes where I talk about a particular podcast that I'm a fan of. So if you can put those pieces together, you'll know exactly who we're going to be talking about talking with. Yeah, so it'll be great.
What can I say? And here in the studio, it's been cold and lonely, and then I had to figure out that Dan's gone, and he calls me up and says, "I found the greatest record store in Indianapolis," and I had to find out.
Yes, I did.
What do you got? What did you find?
Well, there's a record store in Indianapolis called Luna Records, and they have a whole bunch of really great selections. Actually, a couple weeks ago in my hometown of St. Louis, I was running around. I went to about 3 or 4 different record stores looking for vinyl and cassette, and it's a little disappointed in the selection, just because I'm predominantly looking for metal most of the time. I mean, every now and again I'll get like an Explosions in the Sky record or Smashing Pumpkins record or something like that, but for the most part I'm looking for metal bands on vinyl because I love metal cover artwork and I love it being, bigger. So I really enjoy the vinyl look. But I was really disappointed in the St. Louis record stores because none of them had a metal section. I mean, the closest thing you could get to metal was like you might be able to find like a Black Sabbath album in the rock section, and it's just really frustrating.
Which is a discussion in and all of itself. Black Sabbath in the rock section, shouldn't that be in the metal section? No, it should be in the blues section. I will save that for when we decide to go on Black Sabbath. You've always been the record guy, though. Like, I mean, yeah, vinyl is trendy now, and I'm not going to say I'm not a vinyl fan, but you've always been like the guy. If I can get it on vinyl, I want to listen to it on vinyl. I don't want to buy the CD. I want to rip my record and listen to that on CD. And I'm like, that kind of defeats the purpose, and that's always been your thing. And then why?
Well, the cool thing is that with modern records, because you could go out and buy like one of the records I got at the record store was Dystopia by Megadeth. And it was cool because inside of it, there was a download code for the digital copy of the album. So at this point, I don't actually even have to buy the CD. It's just there for me, which is really nice. I don't have to buy the digital version of it, so I can have my vinyl to listen to in my home, and I have the digital copy to listen to on the go. I'm going to do a real quick rundown of what I got, because I got some really good stuff, and I'm proud of it. I picked up the first 2 Opeth albums on vinyl. I got Orchid by Opeth, which was really neat because it comes in it's a 2-disc set, and actually the records themselves are actually bright red, which is really cool.
Nice.
I also got Morning Rise by Opeth, which is pretty much the same type of packaging and everything as it was with Orchid.
What, no Blackwater Park?
I did not get Blackwater Park, no. They didn't have that.
Fail.
Yeah, it happens. I don't think they failed because it's good. The Morning Rise record is actually white. It's a bright, clean white color, which is pretty cool. And then I picked up a copy of I picked up the remastered version of Ride the Lightning by Metallica.
I have heard some good things about that, and I've heard the purists pop out of the woodwork and say, it's not the same, it's been remixed and remastered, and it's vinyl, it didn't need to be done. And I'm thinking, if they had remastered it and put it out digitally, you'd have been complaining too. So I don't know what you want at this point.
Sure, I think they did too, though. I think this is anything that we get off of the Blackened record label, which Blackened is the label that Metallica now, that's the label they put all their music out under, is Blackened. And I actually enjoy it because their records are usually pretty reasonably priced. I mean, this one was $20, brand new, and came with a download code and everything. And supposedly the sound quality is better. However, I haven't actually gotten home to listen to it yet, so thanks for to mention that on a future episode, what I thought about how that sounded. I can say that I have pretty high hopes, though, because I also have the remastered version of Kill 'Em All on vinyl that was also put out by Blackened, and I think it sounds phenomenal. The original Kill 'Em All sounds really thin, and this they kind of beefed it up a little bit, and kind of enhances the impact of that record. But then some other ones I got. Was really excited about this one. I found a copy of In Those Darkened Shrines by Nile.
Very nice.
Yeah, and it's also a 4-sided LP. So there's some pretty long songs on here. And this vinyl is also in the bright red. And I found out from the record store that this version was put out by Relapse Records in 2015. but is now completely out of print. And it was not priced when I was looking at it. And I asked him what the price was, and I was kind of cringing because the first thing he tells me is that it's out of print, and he doesn't know, how much to sell it for or whatever. He made me a really, really, really good deal, and I'm glad that I have it. And it's a really great looking vinyl. It's clean. It's got all the lyrics in there, but then like they tend to do with a lot of Nile records. Because if you didn't know, Nile, all their songs are about ancient Egypt, and the lyricist for Nile really goes into a lot of detail about what the songs are about, and where they fall in the Egyptian mythology and all that. So I can just read. I could talk about that kind of crap forever.
We'll have to get to Nile
cool.
At some point. Are remastered vinyls, like, are they worth buying? Because I know vinyl kind of became a hipster thing, and people are stingy, and they're all about, like, I don't want a new pressing of this record. I want the original pressing. And I'm sitting here thinking, you're going to pay hundreds of dollars in some cases for what very likely is going to have some, age wearing and damage. Warped records are like the worst thing you can possibly get. But for those people that are diehard into the format, is a remastered record a good reason? Like, do you want to buy a remastered record, or does it matter to you?
I think so. If I had the option, let's say I walk into a record store and I find original vinyl copy of Rust in Peace sitting right next to the remastered Rust in Peace. They're both vinyl. One's new, and one's about 20 years old. At that point, depending on what the prices are, I mean, if they're the same price, I'm getting the original. If they're really reasonable price, I'm going to get both and listen to them side by side. But if the original is so overpriced and the new record is the new version is remastered anyway, I'm going to probably go for that remastered one, because it's in new condition, and I know it's going to play well, I know it's going to sound good, and it might be a really cool colored vinyl, which is kind of one of the cool things about this fab. Not to mention, I'm going to get that download code for the album to have the digital copy. So, I mean, in a lot of ways, the newer pressing is a better deal, if you really think about it.
For those people that insist that vinyl sounds better, I heard that for all those years, like vinyl sounds better. No, any recording engineer can tell you that louder is not better. It just sounds better at first. And records are the original hi-fis, in my opinion. You had to have a good amp and you had to have a good turntable, a good amp, you had to have a good set of speakers. So what you're getting is a very pure acoustic experience. But then when it got popular and became hipsterish, they started putting out, new records, new bands on vinyl, and then you had remasters. And everybody was like, oh, this is so great. And I said, yep, wait until you start complaining about them pressing a record that's been out of print for 50 years, because how else am I going to buy it on vinyl?
Right, and not break the bank, I think the newer releases are a lot more fair to the artist because, like in the case of Metallica, maybe Metallica's not a good example, but let's say you have a band that's not overly popular. Let's use I don't know. We'll use Nile as an example. I mean, Nile's an immensely popular band, but if I buy a vinyl copy of In Their Darkened Shrines back when it came out, and I realize this is also a bad example because I don't think they ever originally released that album on vinyl, but let's say they did. Let's say a band that has no name, decides that they put out this landmark record in 1985 on vinyl. They sell as many copies of it as they're going to sell, and then maybe 20, 25 years later, the record label decides to re-release them on vinyl, for the masses because it was so classic at that time. That's a lot more fair to the band because now the band is actually still getting, royalties and scanned record sales off of that. Whereas, when you're in the world of views, you want the 1985 original. The band's not getting any kind of compensation for that. And it's especially heartbreaking if the band is still active. Which I don't personally see anything wrong with that. With the re-releases and the remasters. I mean, I could bring it on because I've always liked vinyl, and I would really like the idea that I can buy my latest releases on whatever format I want. I can buy it on vinyl. I can buy it on CD. I could just listen to it on Spotify, or I could download it on Apple Music. I could purchase it, just the MP3s, on Amazon. I can purchase just the MP3s on iTunes.
Well, for those people that lock in on one format and insist it's the best, and they give you their reasons, to them I say, if you like something that much, you've done, hopefully, enough research to have an educated opinion versus just taking a stand on what you like. If you play video games, you can either have a conversation with me about which type of game is the best, or you can lock on first-person shooters and tell me that Call of Duty is the best game. If you like whiskey,
right,
you can lock in on bourbon, or you and I can have a conversation about Scotch versus Irish whiskey, etc. With audio and music in general, I understand why certain arguments were made at the time they were made, but in this modern age that we live in of knowledge and research, we all figured out that they were turning up the dynamics on all the records that came out in the mid to late 2000s. We figured it out, we called them on it, and now the records are sounding better. If you have a digital source, and CDs are the first big digital source that we had, everybody says it doesn't sound as good as my record. And my answer to that was, well, your record is going into probably a better amplifier because no turntable has an amplifier built in that's good. Almost no amplifier in 99% of the cases that I'm aware of. So your CD player probably wasn't going into an equally good audio delivery system. And then the advent of digital music, and yes, I'll get to cassettes. I know I'm kind of skipping, but in the advent, CD players were everywhere. They were in boom boxes. They were in your car. And the second era of the Walkman was the CD player.
Mm-hmm.
And the audio didn't sound bad. It never sounded bad, not to me. And I would even argue that digital is a more true representation of the original audio source because it's not influenced by analog signal path, theoretically.
Yeah, I mean, scientifically, I totally get what you're saying. I just...
So I guess we've all learned how to treat the audio, to nowadays, of course, depending on how it's mixed, because there's that whole argument with MP3s and the audio level being higher just because it's built into the encoder, which there's truth to that. It depends on how you handle the audio. And I with the exception of cassettes, because we all know cassettes don't sound as good. The bass isn't as good. The dynamic ranges are not as good, but it was never designed to be that way. It was kind of considered to be a portable audio source at the get-go.
Well, no, believe it or not, and I could be completely wrong about this, but when the cassette tape was introduced, it was actually more introduced as a portable solution. Because, I mean, back in the day, before you had cassettes, you still had vinyl. You had 8-track. You had, you could even get reel-to-reel audio recordings. And my understanding is, because I wasn't around in the 1960s, but my understanding is that those formats were sonically superior to the cassette tapes we got, later on. And the problem with those formats, though, is that they were just they were expensive, and they might have sounded better, but what are you going to listen to on that? I would argue that the cassette tape is worth getting at least a little bit of credibility in popularizing the idea of having favorite musical artists and bands and forming a personal connection to them. A lot of that was done through tapes, and I think to the average listener, there wasn't really like much of a desire to have perfect audio quality. And I think number one, because they didn't know any better. You got this tape, and it was what it was. It wasn't
right.
It didn't have some kind of weird expectation. I don't really think that the audio file, as we know it today, really existed outside of recording engineers and things. I think as long as people could hear it, relatively clearly, they didn't really have a problem with it.
I think the cassette was, kind of like the VHS tape. It was just the format that was the easiest to get your hands on. And it wasn't the most expensive option. And it also put you in a position as a listener that, what did we do? We traded tapes. We made mixtapes. We did things like that because it was cool.
Yeah.
If I wanted to listen, if I knew I was going on a 4-hour road trip on Saturday, on Tuesday night, I'm swapping CDs, making myself a mixtape just so I can listen to something a little different. And I've got 2 fresh mix cassettes in. Ready for the trip. And that was our shuffle. That was our shuffle.
Right.
And how it came back and became a trendy thing in like hardcore punk circles in the most recent years, I don't know. In fact, that missed me. I had to be informed of that no, cassettes are a thing again. And it's like, what? How?
I'm not sure that the cassettes ever left hardcore punk. Or even vinyl in that regard. There's because I remember like really being into like emo bands for a long time. And when I say emo bands, I'm not talking about Dashboard Confessional and Thursday and stuff like that. I'm talking about like stuff like like really, really, really early at the drive-in and like Jawbreaker and bands like that, like Fugazi type stuff, Right to Spring. Which was, in a lot of ways, some of those bands were still hardcore punk. However, they were relatively low key about everything. And I remember those bands, like in the mid '90s, were putting out like 7-inch vinyls, like split records with each other. So I don't think vinyl and I don't think cassette really went anywhere as far as those circles went. I think in modern times, with the advent of the modern hipster and things like that, I think that's largely responsible for why those formats are kind of making a comeback, because people that want to look cool or want to have a certain type of image tend to gravitate towards old technology, I've noticed, because there's a certain cool factor. It's like, no, I'm not going to drive a car to work every day. I'm going to ride this 10-speed bicycle, that people don't ride anymore, or
well,
I'm not just going to grow a beard and a mustache. I'm going to make a handlebar mustache, or I'm going to wear vintage metal shirts from the 1980s and things. And so I think a lot of that is largely responsible for the popularization of vinyl and the popularization of cassette in recent years. But I don't really have a problem with it, like other people seem to. There's a lot of people that are very like anti old format, like we should just do all digital. You can get digital and lossless quality, and and again, I guess scientifically and sonically, sure, that stuff. For the most part, and there's some exceptions, but for the most part, I think that stuff all sounds really good. I don't really have a problem with it, but at the same time, there's a few concerns I have about digital music, and I tend to feel more personally connected to vinyl and to cassette because that's what I grew up with. It's not really like a, and more so cassette than vinyl. I'm not pretending like I grew up in the '70s, but for a long time in the early '80s and even the early '90s, you could still get a vinyl copy of an album just right alongside of a cassette copy.
Well, for me, cassettes are a fond memory, like, watching movies on VHS. And as far as VHS tapes are concerned, home video has gotten better. it got better as soon as we had DVDs. And you
sure.
can get a film now and watch it, with Blu-ray and to a lesser extent 4K, because I'm sorry, people, that's overkill. You can watch a movie almost in exact quality to the way it was filmed on the day it was shot in high definition. Yes,
sure.
We have that. But there's still something in the back of your brain, because it's how you grew up. Sometimes I'll stick in that VHS tape of Evil Dead 2, and yeah, it looks like crap, but it only looks like crap compared to what I have now. And cassette tapes are the same way. I remember listening to stuff on cassette, so I still enjoy listening to it on a cassette. But by today's standards, the way we make records and the way we listen to music, digital formats like MP3 and lossless are better strictly from a quality standpoint. But there is something to be said for how you are consuming the audio, not just that you are consuming the audio.
Well, I guess with tapes and records, see, I'm really bad about, I guess with tapes and records, it kind of forces me to listen to the entire finished product as a whole. I mean, yeah, sure, you can fast forward through songs, on a tape, and on vinyl.
And even that is its own little memory.
I mean, you can switch songs. I don't recommend it, but because you could end up accidentally scratching it.
Track 2.
Yeah, and you don't want that. You might have paid $20 or $30 to get that record. It'd be horrible to do that too. But I mean, I know even back whenever all I had was CDs, my wife used to complain that I was the master of the 20-second CD. Because I had so much freedom to change discs. And then later on, I mean, my God, I probably have like 3,000 something songs downloaded onto my phone right now off my Spotify account. And like, it's weird that, and like those, I'll put those on shuffle, and I'll listen to it, and then I'll hear a song, and then like another song will come on after that, and I might like it, but my brain tells me that out of those 3,000 songs, and we're on shuffle, that there's got to be another one in there that's better. And so I'll just kind of skip and skip and skip. So like if I'm on a 20-minute drive, I might spend, 7 or 8 minutes of that drive just skipping songs, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense because, and I know I could go in and make a playlist of songs that I like and things like that, but that's not really how I roll either. The albums that I enjoy the most are the ones that I sit down and listen to from beginning to end. And I kind of feel like cassettes and vinyl kind of forces me to do that.
I guess it gives you less choice. You have to put it in and
good or
consume
bad
it.
Thing, like I don't listen to pop music. Like one of the biggest complaints that people used to always give me about cassettes and give me about CDs or even albums as a whole was that, I heard this really great song on the radio. I love that song, so I went out and I bought the record, but I hate all the other songs on it except for that one song. But in metal, I don't really run into that as much. I mean, it does happen sometimes, but for the most part, I mean, I guess maybe I just do a little bit better research on what I'm getting myself into before I decide to make that purchase. And so, I mean, I think for people like that, I think digital music is probably the way to go, and I understand why it's so much more popular in the sense that it's convenient. You can take it anywhere. You can listen to it anywhere. You can skip songs whenever you want to skip. You can make your own playlist. I mean, it's all cool, but it also kind of sounds to me, growing up in the 80s and 90s, that it sounds like what we were doing with our cassettes, way back in the day. We would make our own mixtapes, and I mean, I would regularly record songs off the radio. There's like the first 10 seconds would be missing because I'd be like, oh crap, and I hit the record button, a little too late. And of course, the tape has to actually start turning, so you lose a few seconds of audio that way before it kicks in. But that was good enough for me as a kid. However, I don't. The point of this discussion is not to say that to try to glorify vinyl and tape to the point of saying it's better, because it's not better. I mean, realistically, a tape is not as good a sound quality as a CD. It's not as good a sound quality as even like a high quality MP3. And there's no denying that. And I think as a kid, you know, a lot of people, you know, I see a lot of these posts online about, you know, only things that a kid growing up in the 90s is going to understand and all that stuff. But I think that's kind of a dumb argument too, because, you know, let's say it's 1993 and, you know, Dan from the future comes back to younger Dan and says, hey man, I've got this little device and you can make phone calls on it and you can play video games on it and you can surf the internet. And I'll be like, what's the internet? You know,
Right.
you know, they're like, you can do all this stuff on it, and you can store basically an unlimited amount of songs. You just type in what you want to hear, and it's there for you. You know, I can see 1993 me throwing all my cassettes away and being like, dude, I'm just going to use this magic box. You know, like
Right.
And I don't think anybody really thinks of it from that perspective. You know, like you were saying about video games, Joe, that, you know, oh, people say Call of Duty is the greatest game in the entire world. Well, if, you know, I'm a kid in the 90s and the only video game I've ever played is Contra, you show me Call of Duty in the 90s, I throw that copy of Contra away and I'm playing this and it looks photorealistic.
Right.
You know, so, I mean, it's a perspective thing. I don't think it's fair to say that the old technology that is technically inferior is better than newer technology.
Right, because if you ask me, and I will ask you, following up here, you know, what's my favorite way to listen to a record? My answer is however I can get it. You know, if a new record comes out today, I'm gonna be able to buy MP3s if I want to, and I'm still gonna be able to buy the CD. I can still buy lossless audio if I want. I can still get it on vinyl. You know, however I can get it, that's how I want to listen to it, because I know there really is no inferior way right now to get that record. I can't tell you the last time I bought an album that offered an MP3 download, and I download the MP3s and it was so bad, because it really isn't. And no, it's not lossless. This is not the conversation for the audiophiles in the audience. You've already won the argument. Hi-Fi, 24-bit, 96K. You've already won. You've got the technically best-sounding audio and the thousands of dollars of amplifiers and speakers and the acoustically treated room, because you're that guy that has a room just for listening to records. Guess what? I'm going to be you one day. But until then, if I'm just driving down the road, or I've just got my stereo on and I'm listening to the new Zayo or the new Metallica, does it really matter? To me, I'm just happy to be hearing it, because I'm still listening to the band. I'm still listening to the artist. I'm still listening to the record. So what's my favorite way? However I can get it. But I'm still partial to CDs. Let's be honest. I'm still partial to putting the disc in while I'm driving and just listening to the record as it goes.
CDs are definitely good. And I mean, honestly, I'm probably going to appreciate CDs more when I'm older and they end up going away, because believe me, people, at some point CDs are going to go away. The thing about it is that
I think CDs will eventually be replaced just by the lossless audio file, the digital file.
Sure.
That's going to be the CD eventually.
So the only argument that I'm going to make in defense of the older technology, really, and why I'm kind of drawn to it, it's definitely not an image thing. I don't think anybody thinks I'm cool because I listen to, you know, Living Sacrifice on cassette or Mortification on cassette. You know, I think what it really came down to for me was, I really like these bands, and like whenever you become a fan of a band, you know, like let's say, you know, for example, you're a fan of Iron Maiden. You know, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to go out, you're going to buy every Iron Maiden album. But there's always a desire for more when you're a fan of things, and a lot of the records that I have on vinyl and that I have on tape, I have CDs for. You know, I have the CD release. It's just that, I guess, for me, when I listen to something like Testament, on cassette tape, I kind of just enjoy the historical aspect of it more. I like the fact that this was, what I'm about to put in my cassette deck is what the band had originally put out. And it's easier to do that on cassette because cassettes are easier to get a hold of than the original vinyl. I'm never going to find a copy of, The Legacy by Testament on vinyl, at least not the original 80s release of it. So to have the original 80s cassette release of it is kind of cool, like looking through the old band photos and all the stuff that was kind of considered cool. And, I had a lot of CD re-releases of albums that came out in the 80s and 90s. But because they're re-releases, some companies do re-releases really well, and they add, really extensive notes and sometimes do a write-up of the band in there, and there's a lot of love put into it. But some of the re-releases are just put out really quickly for a cheap buck, and I've noticed
it's like the old director's cut of DVDs in the early 2000s.
Yeah, it's like a lot of it's really rushed, and I bought about a year ago, I guess. I bought 2 Sacrament records. Not records. I bought the CD versions of the 2 Sacrament albums that were put out in the 90s. And, I was really irritated that there were no lyrics printed in the book. There was no book actually. They were digipacks, and they had they had redone cover artwork, so it wasn't the original artwork. And there was there's a few credits, at the end. And it says that this is the legacy edition of Sacrament, Testimony of Apocalypse. And I was looking at it, and I was like, this is the legendary edition.
So
because
where's all my
really
stuff?
That legendary about a disc in a thin case that has no booklet, and that always irritated me. And I go back and I look at my original, my cassette versions of those albums that were the actual releases from that time period, and it's got expensive notes, it's got lyrics printed, it's got band thank yous, all the little stuff, the little bells and whistles that you like to read through as a fan. So I mean, in cases like that, the cassette version wins. Like these 2 Opeth records that I got. I've got the CD releases of those too, and they've got lyrics printed in them and everything. But it's just because they're re-releases, they really don't have all of the bells and whistles that you get with an original release. But these new vinyl copies that I got, they've got all that stuff. They've got the records. You open them up and they have huge fold outs and a really big sheet of lyrics that you can hold in both hands and read. And when the cover artwork is so big on a vinyl, I mean, some of the stuff is actually like real works of art. You can put them in a frame and hang it on your wall.
It's like my framed copy of The Who's Tommy. It's on my wall right now.
Right. I mean, it's really cool that you can do that. And I know a lot of people that collect vinyl, and they just download the digital and they hang the vinyls up on their wall, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think, I think in certain cases, I think because some of these formats know that they're not the originals, they know that they're not, they're not going to be able to beat CDs. They're not going to be able to beat digital. But I think it's cool that all that stuff is kind of thrown in there for the fans. It's almost as if the actual physical format is more geared towards the fans than maybe the online is, because online you have a file that you download or that you stream, and that's all you get. I mean, you get the cover artwork maybe on a display on your phone, but to me, that I really enjoy just looking at the covers and kind of pointing out all the nuances of them, and I just like that stuff. And so I think I think those formats, cassettes and vinyl especially, just they kind of have their way of getting their hooks into you as a fan, and kind of brings you in, because like you look at the cover of an album, and you're kind of getting that audio visual impression. So it's like one of the best examples I could think of is self-titled Black Sabbath, the first Black Sabbath album, where you've just got this creepy woman on the cover, and she's holding like a black cat, and it's just really dark and foreboding, and it really sums up what you're going to hear when you listen to it. And I think especially having giant cover artwork like that on a vinyl, it just really drives that point home.
It's kind of like digital media, because this applies to books as well as films and all the streaming music that we can get now. If you think about it, digital media, and I'm going to limit this to streaming, because I still kind of feel like if you buy an album digitally, you still have that album because you did pay for it. But like streaming is kind of like fast food for entertainment. Because before, you would go to the store and you'd buy your copy of Master of Puppets. And then you take home your copy of Master of Puppets. And then you open the record or the cassette or the CD and you put it in and you sat there and you listened to it. And if you're like you sat there and read the lyrics and you read the linear notes. And same thing with movies and same thing with books. If I'm a book reader, I can buy that new book on my Kindle, for example, or my iPad if it's an Apple, and I can read it, and I've got it. It's the words are in front of me, but for some reason, for most people, the feeling is different. And if you think about it, like if you have Spotify or you've got Google Music, like it's kind of like fast food. Fast food is okay every now and then. Sometimes I want my cheeseburger and fries. And then other times I want my steak dinner that I took time to prepare. And that's not a bad thing, but I guess the mentality is different. There's a difference between holding the record and listening to the record and just hitting the button and letting it play. I'm still consuming it, and you can still enjoy it. But as far as a feeling is concerned, like I'm an exception, because for me, digital is the greatest thing ever, because I'm limited by my physical ability to not always see very good. So you give me a book or a comic and I can zoom right in, perfect for me, but I'm the exception. I'm the norm now, because that's how the media is consumed.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I think what really drives us as music fans, really though, is the artists themselves. So for me, like, I'm a big fan of Opeth, so I'm okay with having multiple copies of the same album in different formats.
Right.
And that's just me, though. Other people might feel differently. But I think there's just a certain physical connection you have with a physical album, and that's just maybe for me, but I just tend to appreciate it a little bit more, especially like I was saying earlier, that records and tapes, they kind of force me to listen to it all the way through and to really appreciate it. So like, if an album is good, it really enhances my enjoyment. However, if an album is bad, it can actually get a little bit emotional, a little bit angry.
I spent money on this.
Right. Like, yeah, I mean, when I freaked out about Risk, because when I originally bought Risk, I bought it on cassette tape, and I had to listen to it all the way through, because, the first time you listen to a bad record, you're kind of like, you're in denial a little bit, because you're like, well, it could get better. Maybe just these first few songs aren't very good. And I got to the end of the tape, and I was like, okay, well, let's hear what side 2 has to get. So in a certain sense, I was kind of subjected to listening to just that. And of course, I'm freedom as a human being. I could have just turned it off at any given point, but I think the average listener is going to know what I mean, about kind of trying to stick through it to the end. And I think records and tapes kind of encourage that. And it's something I really wish that more people would do. I kind of feel like with digital stuff, people have become a little bit more fickle about music and movies and books and things like that.
No joke. The episode about Megadeth came out on the 25th. On the 28th, he did an interview, Dave Mustaine, with blabbermouth.net, where he said that Risk should have been released as a solo album, and he's sorry.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
So...
Does that mean Dave is one of our listeners?
I mean, if he was, that would be amazing. And
yeah, if Dave Mustaine listens to this podcast, then definitely send us a message and
definitely be on the podcast.
We would love to talk to you.
And most likely, I will apologize for Dan's behavior related to Risk, but I assure you, he will not.
Yeah, I mean, so that was just kind of our little discussion. Me and Joe weren't really trying to argue about digital and analog or anything. It's just something that that I like to talk about. I could sit here and talk about vinyl. And Joe, you actually didn't let me finish the rest of my haul that I got. I only got about halfway through it.
Oh man!
Some of the other records that I got were. I think there were three more. I got Dystopia by Megadeth, which I think I already mentioned at least once. That one was also on a bright red vinyl, which is really cool.
Very nice.
And then the other one I got was, I may not be pronouncing this right, but this band, I believe their name is pronounced Opprobrium or Opprobrium. It's hard to. It's Opprobrium, and they had a record out called Serpent Temptation, and this is really cool. It reminds me a lot of Sepultura, and apparently the band put the record out back in 1980 or 1988, and it was just recently re-released by Relapse Records, and it's really cool to see that on vinyl. And I picked it up. It's actually. On my last business trip that I took, I went to San Antonio, Texas, and I actually purchased this album on CD. So it was really cool to get the vinyl for that. And the last one is probably the prized possession out of all of it, which was a copy of Human by the band Death. And
very nice.
Apparently the version that I have is limited to 500 copies. It was also released by Relapse Records, and it comes on a solid gold vinyl record, which is just...
I'm going to go out on a limb and call that your album of the week.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I've been listening to Human a lot. Unfortunately, because I'm out of town, I can't put these records on and listen to them. However... what I've just been doing is I've been listening with the digital copies, and while I read along with the vinyl, which is kind of nice to be able to do. Like I'm saying, I'm totally okay with both formats existing.
Well, dude, I'm glad you called in.
Yeah, it was fun.
We'll see you when you get back. Be safe. I'll be seeing everybody that's listening right now on Friday when me and Buddy, as Dan put it, try something a little different. And on that note, thank you for listening. Hope you all enjoyed it because it was something different. And
it was fun to do.
Dan will see you next week. I will see you in 2 days.
All right. Have a good night, guys.
Party on.
It's like Slayer.